So yeah, it's, there's always a pun when it comes to my talks. I'm afraid I may drop a few more in as we go. Welcome to Carrion Club. You are all part of the Carrion Club now. Oh, that's the doorbell again. Today is going to be a whirlwind introduction for you. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person to do a really fun physical workshop, but hopefully this will come as a good close second. We'll give you a bit of an intro to their behaviour in ecology as a family, go through some identification tips, looking at the most common species you're going to encounter, and then some tips on trapping and recording. And we'll finish up with a fun quiz just to test what you've learned today. I will pause for 2 points to take questions, and as it's a nice small group this evening, yeah, please don't be shy. You've got lots of time and opportunity to ask whatever you want to. So here we go. Thought I'd give you a little bit of an intro to me if we haven't met before. So as Richard mentioned, I am wearing 2 hats today. I am a co-organiser for the Silphidae recording scheme. My main job is as a curator at National Museum Scotland. And I got into Carrion Beetles back when I did my first degree, which was in forensic science. So I was putting out lots of dead things and monitoring the insects that colonise these dead things. Don't worry, just animal remains, so mostly dead rabbits. I hope none of you are having your dinner at present, but you probably did know what you were signing up for tonight. There will be a couple of images of carrion, but nothing too grisly. So I met Carrion Beetles during this research, during my undergrad studies. And I went off and I studied entomology as a master's for a bit, but then found a job at the University of Edinburgh, which is how I ended up in Scotland. And here I was responsible for breeding one species of burying beetle, Nicrophorus vespilloides, and using it to design experiments and then implementing these experiments. In particular, we were looking at aging of these beetles. And so for any one time, I was responsible for feeding about 3,000 individual beetles and creating little beetle families. So each of these larger boxes here that you can see on these shelves contained a dead mouse and a couple of beetle parents and their larvae. And this was great fun, really enjoyed working at the university, but we were just looking at one species. And for me, that wasn't quite enough. So when a job came up at the museum, grabbed that with both hands. And I've been there for about 6 years now. So my job as assistant curator is really dynamic. I love it because in normal times, when I'm not working from home, no 2 days are the same. It's all about making our collection of 2.5 million insect specimens accessible to everybody, from researchers in the community, other curators at other institutions, and to the general public. So using the collection for research and education. And I get to meet lots of wonderful researchers and very skilled amateurs in the community, and it's brilliant. It's great fun. And through my job, I have been allowed to have some room to specialise as well, which has been great. So I'm now not only looking at silphids in the UK, but also on a global scale too, which is brilliant. And I've been able to meet some of the world's leading experts on this group, which is great. But because I can't get enough of these beetles in my work time, I have collaborated with 2 colleagues to run a national recording scheme as well. So this is with Matt Esch and Richard Wright. Richard Wright actually had the idea to run a scheme several years before, but it wasn't until 2016 when Matt and I joined forces and kind of relaunched the scheme. Matt and I kind of take on the main role of promoting the scheme. So basically, we're just really passionate about this group, and we're desperate to encourage more of you to feel the same way. So we do this through social media, through running workshops like today, and then Matt and I are responsible for verifying records and trying to collate those. Yeah, so it's been a pleasure working with Matt and Richard. It's been good fun, and long may it continue. The main reason I wanted to start a scheme was because of my personal interest in this group and kind of concerns about potential declines and no one really monitoring what was going on. And because there wasn't an existing scheme like other groups, we didn't really have like a backlog of data, a data set to look at. So we also have collated historic records as well as collating those present day records too, to start looking at the distribution of these beetles in more detail. And it's what today is all about, because we want your records too. Now, I'm a bit biased. I do think they are the best group of beetles, but I have good reason. So not only are they incredibly important, most of them are carrion feeders, so they're fulfilling this unique niche and part of nature's kind of recycling theme. But they're pretty dynamic for a small family. So globally, there's just 200 species in the world. In the UK, we've just got 21, but they're really dynamic. So you've got those that are carrion feeders, you've got some that are predatory, you've got some that have even evolved to be parasitoids. So there's this one called Nicrophorus pustullatus, which is found in North America. And over time, this has evolved to start utilising snake eggs instead of carrion, which is just crazy. And you've also got some that are just downright beautiful. So some of the South Asian species are incredible, iridescent blue and really, really lovely. So a lovely family. As I mentioned, they are really important decomposers. So they help by breaking down this nasty waste organic matter and recycling all that nutrients that is locked away up in these corpses. They also have applications in forensic science, which is how I connected with them in the first place. So if the carrion was a human corpse, these beetles could be used as insect evidence to work out the minimum time since death. So pretty special there. The other thing is that they have a pretty long fossil record. So their ancestors of the beetles that we have today, carrion beetles, were around in the Middle Jurassic. So, you know, they were responsible for breaking down carrion in the form of dinosaurs and early mammals. So they've been doing this for a very long time, and they're very successful. So bringing it back to the UK, what have we got? We've got 21 species recorded from here. A few of those we believe to probably be extinct now, but it's still worth including these on our keys, and just in case anybody does happen to come across them again. And even within those 21 species in the UK, they're still quite diverse. We have got the true carrion feeders, but we've also got predators. We've got a couple of vegetarians in there too. So it's a nice mixture as a family. And what makes them really good as a group for getting into recording is they're quite an easy group for identification when it comes to beetles. They're quite large. We've got quite discernible characters. So hopefully, if you haven't worked with any other groups of beetles before, this is going to be your gateway group, and you're going to love beetles after working with these. So you may be familiar with the Nicrophorus. So these are the burying beetles, and they're the true carrion feeders. They also are known by another common name, which is sexton beetles, which links in with graveyards, churchyards. I prefer the common name burying beetles because it links to that. It's very descriptive of that behaviour that they have, of quite literally burying carrion. So why do they do it? Well, the competition is incredibly high. Carrion is it's a very ephemeral resource, so they need to be able to detect it, locate it, and utilise it with at the same time competing with all the other invertebrates and vertebrates that will be interested in this resource as well. So you've got things like foxes, you've got lots of blowflies and other groups of flies that will be interested in this resource too. So they've evolved this technique because of that high competition. So as well as burying it, they also devote a lot of time and energy into caring for the young. So what they do is they locate a small dead mouse or potentially a bird. When they've located this, they will work together to bury it. They do this by excavating soil from underneath the corpse, and they have very broad heads and strong front legs with found out tarsi to help them do this. Gradually, the carcass sinks down into the soil and then it's then concealed. They will then work very hard to strip the fur or feathers off of that corpse. Again, hope nobody's eating right now. And they prepare it into a nest. Here's a picture for you. So this one on the left here is the kind of nest shape. They've mushed it into a ball. They've stripped all the fur off this mouse. They've then coated it in secretions. So these secretions come from their mouths and from the anus. And these are really, really important because these secretions actually have antimicrobial properties, and it actually helps slow down the decomposition. So this is amazing. It helps that food resource last for longer. And it's really important because this is what the offspring are going to be developing on. So once they've prepared it, they've mated and the females laid eggs in the soil beneath. And when they hatch, they arrive at the top of the carcass in a crater that the parents have made. They're then fed directly, very much in the way that young chicks in a nest are fed by their parents. The parents feed on the rotting flesh and regurgitate to the kids. So it's charming, really lovely family setup, and it's very, very successful. So the reason that both male and female invest all this time and care is because of this limited resource and the need for their offspring to survive. What's even more interesting is very recent research has shown that the secretions that they coat the carcass in not only slow down the decomposition, but they also contain chemicals that deter other burying beetles, which is pretty fascinating. This is hot off the press. This just came out last month. So they're a fascinating group. I'm sure you can see that now. And there's lots of different research that's going on looking at this behaviour, this biparental care. This is a lovely shot of a parent feeding a larva. The larvae don't vocalise, they can't vocalise, so they will actually beg for more food by tactile begging. So the offspring will raise their legs and touch the parents on the face. This is a way of begging for more food. But research at Edinburgh University found that if larvae beg too much, they get killed. So parents are known to cull their offspring. They do this, if there's too much begging, but they will also do this if there isn't quite enough food to go around. Now the parents themselves can vocalise, they stridulate, and you'll notice this if you disturb a burying beetle. So if you find one, you will hear a squeak. It is very, very squeaky. So the way that they create their noise is that they have these ridges on the abdominal segments. You can just see them here. And this is called the stridulatory file. So it is a series of ridges, and on the underside of the elytra, underside of their wing cases, there's some tiny hairs. Don't know if you can make those out. And as they move the abdomen in and out past their wing cases, these small hairs rub against that. And I knew about this, but only recently did I know that there's actually 3 types of stridulation. So I'm going to play this little clip for you now. Hopefully you can hear it. Whack your audio right up. Please plays ball for us. I hope you heard that one. I'm going to play it again for you. It's incredibly squeaky. You'll certainly notice it if you do disturb one. So I knew that they had this stridulation, but it was only when I was doing some research on the literature recently that I found out that there's actually 3 types. So they have the main one that you might assume this is, and which I'm sure, I don't speak burying beetle, but I'm sure that this one is the defensive stridulation to try and ward off predators. And then you have the courtship stridulation, so to try and attract a mate. And thirdly, you've got the call to the offspring to signal that it's time to feed. And that's because the early instars of the offspring are very dependent on the parents feeding them directly. But in the later stages, once they're big enough, they are able to self-feed. So they may be spread out around the carcass and the parents may signal to them to come back. Now, when you find these beetles, you'll quite often find them with a bit of carry-on. Yeah, hitchhikers. So these are phoretic mites. They are hitching a lift on what I like to call the beetle bus. So they're using the beetle for transportation. They do this because these mites are predatory and they're feeding on fly eggs and larvae. And they know that the beetle is heading to Carrion, where these is going to be full of fly eggs and larvae. Because a lot of the time flies will locate the carrion first. So even if the beetles have buried it, there may be some eggs and maggots on the corpse. And the beetles are able to predate on these as well, but these mites kind of give them a helping hand. So it's sort of seen as a mutualistic relationship, or it was previously thought as a mutualistic relationship because of the benefit to the burying beetles. But some research has shown that actually these mites are capable of feeding on the beetle eggs too. So it's a bit of a grey area. They may not be as good as we once thought. So I did drop a link in the chat. This is the most important link that you should have at the moment. This links you to our recording scheme webpage, and here there is a link to download our free identification key. So you'll absolutely need a copy of this. There are some other keys available. One is in Andrew Duff's volume of Beetles of Britain and Ireland. And I have to get a shameless plug in because we have a book out. So this came out just last month. This is a brand new distribution atlas for the Hysterids, Sororitids and Silphids of Britain and Ireland. I don't feel too bad plugging it. We don't make any money from this. Myself and my colleagues who wrote this book, we did it for the sheer love of these beetles and to try and promote the recording of them. So do grab yourselves a copy of that if you want to learn even more about these beetles. It's jam-packed full of information about ecology, of course, distribution, but also conservation as well. And we have got identification keys in here too. So the identification key for Silphids in here is slightly different to the one that we have for the scheme, but on a very, very similar theme. And it's got little thumbnails and plates at the back as well. So that's my shameless plug out the way. Done that. We'll just pause now. Before I get onto the identification section, if you've got any questions about their natural history, about those behaviours that I've already talked about, now is your chance. So I think, Richard, if you want to take any questions.
Yeah, I guess you can see me now and hear me, hidden in the background. We haven't had any questions in yet, but I'm quite interested about those mites because I've seen them on other beetles, like dung beetles. Are they the same mites as on them, or are they different species, or don't we know? Or
yeah, so I don't identify the mites myself, but there are a few species that are associated with the Nicrophorus. So I imagine the ones that are on your Geotrupes, they are probably maybe the same genus but a different species.
Oh, okay.
But there's a very much a similar theme. They are on the dung beetles because they're predating on flies that are found in the dung.
Okay, we've had a question come in now. How far can these beetles travel to find their carrion? And that's from Liz.
Yeah, good question. So it's several miles. I haven't got an exact number on there, but yes, several miles. So they are strong flyers. Most of them are nocturnal or crepuscular, so they're flying at night. But we have got one species that we'll come to shortly that is a day flyer. So on a nice hot sunny day, you can see them in flight sometimes. So yeah, they will fly a distance, especially so when they've closed and then they're at the stage of being fresh adults, they disperse. Yeah, and they will fly to wherever the carrion is. So they have fantastic antennae, the berrien beetles, full of jam-packed, loaded with chemical receptors to detect the sulfurous compounds that are released during decomposition.
Okay, we've got another question coming from Hawks. I only see these in the moth trap. Can you tell me a little bit more about why they will be there and what attracts them? I guess you might be covering this later in the talk, but
yeah, I mean, it's similar with other insects that are found in traps. I think there's still some unanswered questions. We're not entirely sure, but obviously those that are night active are potentially navigating via, you know, the light of the moon, and as with all other lights, they kind of interfere with that. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I'll say for sure.
Well, the next question here is quite museum orientated, so it ticks both boxes really. Are these beetles used by scientists to strip the carrion off skeletons?
That's a good question. Actually, no one's ever asked me that before. They're not. I think that's just because domestids tend to be better at cleaning bones and getting rid of the kind of later stages of decomposition, like tissues and things. So these beetles really do need a fresher carcass because the offspring need to feed when it's still wet. If you want to really clean the skeleton, you need to have the domestids, which are going to feed on the slightly drier tissues. Also, I would say that they're quite disruptive. So all those instances of breeding these beetles on a dead mouse in a kind of closed environment, the skeleton itself would be totally distributed all over the box. It's kind of not left in a nice, neat manner.
Okay, let's see. Eye record. I guess, is that part of the recording scheme setup for Silphids?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely something we're going to come to later. So I can hopefully answer that question as I go through those slides for you.
Do sexton beetles share large carcasses between multiple pairs?
Great question. Yes, they do. So some of the larger species will go for slightly larger carrion, but if you've got something like a dead deer, there's no beetle in the UK that's going to be able to bury that on its own. So they will breed occasionally above ground. And when it's a large resource, you do get communal breeding sometimes. You'll get several different pairs utilising that one dead animal.
How common is biparental rearing with beetles? Is that quite an unusual thing in Silphids?
Yeah, it's very unusual. There's not many examples. Even parental care within beetles is quite rare. You've got fungus beetles and a few others, but really this is an extraordinary behaviour. Most insects would lay an egg and then wander off, fly off and be done with it. So yeah, it's pretty special.
We've got to the end of the questions.
Well, if you're ready, we can jump into the identification section.
Yeah, go for it.
Brilliant. So I'm often asked, how do you recognise a carrion beetle? The tricky part is that the family as a whole, Silphidae, is split into two subfamilies, and you tend to either recognise one or the other. Overall, the family, they're quite large beetles compared to the rest of the beetles we get in the UK. They have 10 or 11 segmented antennae, but if you're looking at a burying beetle, 4 of those segments are this distinct club. On the whole, they're either very dark, uniform in colour, or they're dark with these striking orange markings. And if you're a burying beetle, you've got truncated wing cases, so you can see a bit of the exposed abdominal segments. And then if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, and you're looking at beetle family identification guides and things, you're going to look at the formation of the tarsi. And for anyone that's not familiar with that, all that really means is the number of segments on this tarsi here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on the back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is a formulation of 5, 5, 5. But really, once you get your eye in and you know what a burying beetle looks like and you recognise what the other subfamily looks like, you're going to know it's a Silphid. So there's difference between the two subfamilies. The Nicrophorinae, that's all the burying beetles, all those in the genus Nicrophorus. They have those clubbed, really strong, distinct clubbed antennae. And then the others are in the subfamily Silphinae, and they have more thread-like, gradually expanding tips on the antennae, but never a really solid club. So that's your key difference there. So let's look at the burying beetles first. So we have got these 6 species in the UK. There is another one which I've missed out today, and that is Germanicus, which we believe not to have ever been resident, and certainly is not very unlikely to be found now, but it is in the Keys, so look out for it there. So if you get a all black species, this is most definitely going to be Nicrophorus humator. And we have assigned some new common names to the beetles in the new book, so you're going to be introduced to some of those shortly. If you've got one that's got orange and black markings, then the easiest way to separate one of them out is by looking at those antennae. So you can make out in this picture on the bottom left, this one here has black clubs to the antenna. It's the only one that's got orange markings and black clubs. And this is our most common species, Nicrophorus vespilloides. So then to whittle the rest down, You want to be looking at the features on the thorax and on those wing cases and abdomen. So you're going to be looking for the presence of hairs. By the way, these can all be seen with the naked eye, or potentially if the beetle's quite worn, if it's an older individual, maybe you can get a hand lens out and look for any traces of hairs on the thorax. But looking at those hairs on the thorax, you want to know if they're all-encompassing, all around the circumference of the thorax, or if they're just a nice band at the top of the thorax, like this one here. As I mentioned, these hairs can abrade, they can wear off. So the other character that we have to separate these two is the hind legs. So if you look at these, Vespillo has these lovely bendy, curved hind legs. I like to say it's kind of got like a cowboy stance. If I'd had my way with the common names, this would have been the John Wayne Carrion Beetle. Unfortunately, we've not gone with that. But this one is really, really easy to recognise based on those curved hind legs. And then we've got these two here, investigator and interruptus, formerly separated based on the top banding and how interrupted it was. But this is a really variable character. These patternings can vary with individuals. So the other feature to look at is the presence of golden hairs on the abdominal segments. So I'm going to take you through just to see some of these in a bit more detail. So Nicrophorus humator, as I mentioned, we've assigned some new common names and we've called this one the Undertaker. Does what it says on the tin. It's a very common and widespread species, and we have already had several records of this one in for this year. Incredibly early, actually. Our first record was in the first week of February. It's almost a month earlier than our previous early record. It's one that's crepuscular, and actually all the burying beetles tend to be crepuscular, except for Nicrophorus vespilloides. So as mentioned, it's active now, but you can find it right the way through to November. Here's that really common one, which we have in the common name, the common burying beetle. This was previously given to another species, Vespillo, the one with the curved hind legs, but that is definitely not our most common burying beetles. So we have suggested a change in those common names there, just because it could be a bit misleading. Another one that's incredibly widely distributed, and it's day active, as I mentioned. So on a nice hot sunny day, you can see this one in flight. Oh, another thing just to mention about this one, it can be tricky to get photos of them when they're busy moving about, trying to bury beneath something. And so if you can only get a photo of this one when it's got its head really deep into some carrion, don't worry, get that photo of the behind, because this species also has the second banding of orange markings reduced to 2 separate splodges. There can be variation, but on the whole, this is a nice little additional character that can help us if we can't see the head end of this beetle. As mentioned, yeah, day active and found between March and November. Here's that John Wayne Carrion Beetle. We've called it the bent-legged burying beetle, so hopefully that common name there gives you a little bit of help with remembering that key character of the bendy hind legs. This one is crepuscular, but again, can be found on sunny days occasionally. We have had some records of it day fly. It's scarce in Scotland and Ireland, but in Wales and in England, it is quite common and widespread. The scarce burying beetle, as its common name indicates, is not likely to be found in your neck of the woods if you are based in Wales. There is this one historical record, which is from 1860 something, has not been observed there since. It's worth keeping an eye out, but you can see the current distribution would make it fairly unlikely, but who knows? With the way that species distributions are changing at the moment, it's always good to be on the lookout. As I mentioned, this one has golden hairs all the way around the pronotum, and it has straight hind tibia, so you can't get it mixed up with the bent-legged burying beetle. Then we have Nicrophorus interruptus. Here we go. It does have that separation in the top banding, but the really important thing to look at is those golden hairs on the abdominal segments, which investigator does not have. This one is nationally scarce, and I should have a map for you. Oh, no, the map's not come up. But this has a southern distribution, so it's not one that I get up here in Scotland. And this is the one it gets confused with. But if you look at those abdominal segments, you've got darker hairs, and only the final segment has golden hairs on it. Another little one that's not in any identification keys is that this one also has a pair of Scotty dogs on its elytra. So you can just see here, use your imagination. We have a couple of little Scotty dogs there. But as I mentioned, the markings can be a little bit variable, so please don't rely on this. It's just a bit of fun, that one. But very, very common and widespread. If you're moth trapping, you will definitely see this beetle. It's our second most common at light traps, the first being the undertaker. So that covers the burying beetles. So they're all the ones with the big clubbed antennae, and then moving over to those that have got the thread-like antennae is the Silphidae. Okay. So this is just a little overview of some of the beetles. As you can see, they are all dark in colour, with the occasional one that is a red variation. So for a few of the species, they actually come in two colour forms, red and black. But on the whole, you notice the difference is that the elytra cover all those abdominal segments, with potentially the last final one sticking out the end. And also, if you've got a female that's gravid, if she's ready to lay eggs, you sometimes have an extended abdomen as well. And the antenna, they're thread-like. With Thanatophilus, these three here, they are more clubbed than the others, but it's still not that really distinct kind of bulbous looking club. So we have Necrodes littoralis, and this is the biggest one of the sylphines. It's a really chunky beetle, and it's another one that is attracted to light. So you will find this in moth traps. Its common name, and this is an old common name, is the shore sexton beetle. And it's actually not a sexton beetle, it's not a burying beetle. These ones don't have any of the parental care. They don't bury the carrion. They don't invest time and energy on the young. They lay their eggs onto the carrion, and the larvae fend for themselves. But it's also not a shore sexton beetle either. So it previously was believed to have a coastal distribution, but that's not the case. Now that we've got a wealth of records to look at, we know that this beetle is frequently found inland. It doesn't have a coastal connection, but it's common and widespread, and has a nice big boom in its populations around the beginning of May. So one to look out for in the spring. We have a really interesting record from Edinburgh, where I am. A couple of years ago, they had their corpse flower, the Titan arum, in bloom. And as you may know, this is a plant that is very foul smelling. It is utilising carrion insects as pollinators. So it's a plant that's native to Sumatra, definitely not Scotland. But it's, one of the many tropical plants that's kept at the Botanic Gardens here. And so we were monitoring it to see if any of the blowflies would make it into the glass house. They didn't, but amazingly a carrion beetle did. So Necrodes littoralis was found in the big inflorescence of this stinky flower. And I was really chuffed. So that's the little female there. Now, Necrodes can sometimes be confused for the undertaker, Nicrophorus humator, and that's because they're both black and they both have orange tips to their antennae. But remember, it's those clubbed antennae that make the difference. You've also got differences in the pronotum. It's much more orbicular, much more circular in Necrodes, and the hind legs are different too. This one on the left, the Necrodes littoralis, has got the curved hind tibia, and it's a male, and we can see that based on its chunky femora here, chunky thighs. Moving on to Thanatophilus. So these are much smaller. They're about half the size of the Necrodes. And we have three species, two of which you will encounter in the south, and we have two in Scotland. This one here, the Thanatophilus rugosus, is renamed the wrinkled death lover. Thanatophilus sinuatus is the smooth death lover. You spot the difference between these quite easily. And Thanatophilus dispar is one that's very scarce, so we call this the scarce death lover. So rugosus has this lumpy, bumpy texture to its elytra, this kind of wrinkled appearance, which helps you distinguish it from its sister species, sinuatus. Another feature is on sinuatus, it has a tiny, what we call shoulder tooth. You'll see that in the key. So if you imagine that this corner is the shoulder of the beetle, there's a tiny little protrusion, which there is a nice picture of in the key, and I've failed to include that today, sorry. As I mentioned, not all of the carrion beetles are true carrion beetles. We have some predatory species in here too. So we have 3 predators, and 2 of them are feeding on mollusks. And the third is hunting on caterpillars. So the most common one, our common snail hunter, is Phosphuga atrata. This is one that comes in 2 colour forms, as I mentioned, and it is identified by its wonderful shiny appearance. It has a very narrow and elongate head, and it has a semicircular pronotum. So you can find the red and black variations together. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason for the colour. And as I mentioned, they're predatory on snails, and they're quite similar to glowworms in the way that they do this. So again, sorry if we've got any mollusks fans in the house, but these beetles are pretty feisty predators. They will work by predating on the mollusk by biting the foot of the snail. They then release digestive enzymes, which help break through any defensive mucus that the snail is producing, and it then ultimately helps dissolve the flesh of the snail. And then they use that really narrow head to get right into the shell, which this picture from Maria illustrates really beautifully. Now, there's still just at the right time to go look for these now. The easiest time to find them is actually when they're overwintering. So they will start to wake up soon. But now, if you go and look under any fallen logs, under bark of dead wood, or even under kind of mossy areas, you're likely to find this one. It's incredibly widespread and common, but favours woodlands. So do go hunting for this one. But it's always good practice to put back any bark, any moss that you move to search for these beetles. And we have Ablateria laevigata, and we've called it the smooth snail hunter. It is incredibly similar in its appearance. It's got that elongate, narrow head, but it's really smooth. It lacks the ridges and the general texture to the elytra that the other has. When you see it in, in the flesh, in the chitin, its pronotum is almost domed. So it's slightly different shape here as well, but very similar lifestyle, predatory on the mollusks. Then we have the caterpillar hunter, this Dendroxina quadrimaculata, and this is a lot less common. I should say, moving back, this one potentially not going to be found on wood. This one would be looking where it has a southern distribution, whereas Dendroxina quadrimaculata has a quite strange patchy distribution, and I think it's probably under-recorded. To find this one, it's predominantly hunting caterpillars on oak trees in hawthorn. We're not exactly sure if there's a specific species it's targeting, but I think what we need is more people out beating oak trees and looking particularly in the spring months. So in April or May, if you are so inclined, please go out and hunt for this beastie. It's very, very distinctive. You can't confuse it with any other British beetle. It has these lovely spots on these orangey brown elytra. It doesn't have such a narrow head as the others because it's hunting caterpillars. It doesn't need to have the same kind of structures there, but it is nationally scarce. And then we have one of the vegetarians. So Aclypea opaca, or the golden beet beetle. It's not a carrion beetle at all. It is feeding on the plant tissues of beet, sugar beet. And for that reason, it was previously considered a pest of sugar beet crops. Needless to say, that is not the case anymore. I'm quite happy to say that there's likely to be because of the use of pesticides, that it's just not found in the numbers that it used to be. Just had a bumblebee come into my room, sorry. That's unusual. Anyway, yeah, so it's nationally scarce now. Really one to look out for. It has beautiful golden pubescence over both the thorax and the elytra. Almost looks like a little teddy bear. Really beautiful, especially when you catch it in the light and those hairs shine in the sunlight. Wow, there's a bee in my room. Interesting. Sorry, folks. As I said, it's really a good one to look out for in the spring, active April through to August. Another one that's incredibly widespread and common is Oiceoptoma thoracicum, or commonly known as the red-breasted carrion beetle. And this is a slightly different one in that it's a bit more of a generalist. You'll actually find it on carrion, on dung, and also fungi. And it has this particular association with the stinkhorn fungus. So if you ever encounter one of these at the right time, you can find huge numbers of these beetles attracted to this fungi. And this is because it's kind of, it's utilising carrion insects in the way that the corpse flower is. It's emitting those smells like the, rotting flesh to try and get blowflies predominantly to move the spores around for the fungus. But these beetles they like it too. So it does prefer woodlands, this one, and you'll likely find it between April through to August. So that was a kind of whirlwind look at the identification features of the carrion beetles in their adult stages. The larvae are much more difficult, but this is something that I'm looking at the moment, trying to ultimately produce an identification key for the British species, which there currently isn't one. What I can tell you is how to spot the difference between the two subfamilies. And as I mentioned, you either recognise one or the other when they're adults, and this is the same case for the immature stages too. Now you can probably see why they're different. The Nicrophorus are very fleshy, and this is because, with their lifestyle, they are buried. They are concealed and they're protected underground, and they're cared for and protected by the parents. But the Silphide that don't have any parental care, they are, left to fend for themselves. So they have much more chitinous exoskeleton, much more robust, and that's because, they're out and about and need a little bit more protection. So what you can do is take photos of any Silphid larvae that you encounter. Do send them on to us. We're still interested in them, and there is a couple of species that we are able to identify more easily from photos, but on the whole, we would need to have voucher specimens of these ones. And if you're interested in collecting some of those for me, brilliant, get in touch. I'm currently trying to build my collection, which will be used to produce the identification key. And we definitely need some fresh material to get some top-notch photographs. So I'll have another break here. Really sorry that I got distracted by a live insect flying around my room. It's very exciting. It's just landed on my lamp.
Okay, I don't think there's any questions in just yet, but it was very appropriate having a bee coming in an entomology talk.
Brilliant.
Wouldn't it have been nice if that had been a burying beetle?
I don't know, Richard. Would that have been bad to potentially get something smelly coming out of my flat?
I don't know. People would think it's sort of a fix, I think. Yeah, it's strange. I must admit, I don't see those larvae very often. So, turning stones, I've probably seen, I don't know, 2 or 3 in my life.
Yeah.
Are they quite rare, or are there any tips to find them?
Oh, well, that's something that I'm going to be exploring, hopefully. Do you know, we have had quite a few records sent in that are of larvae, and it tends to be Phosphuga or Silphid, which is the ones that's in this image here. So this one is identifiable if you get a photo like this, because it's all black, and then these protrusions here, we call these the paraturgites, and they're pale. So you can't mix that one up with any of the others. And for Phosphuga, it's entirely black. Of course, you don't counter the Nicrophorus unless you're looking at carrion.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that probably one of the best moments during a workshop, an in-person workshop, was when Matt and I put out rabbit corpses for the group to monitor. And Matt went and he buried them a couple of weeks before the workshop was due to take place. And then we then exhumed the bunnies, and we had burying beetle larvae in there that had got to quite a sizable state. And it was fantastic to be able to show people these, because it is a rare occasion where you get to see them in the field. So I'm sorry we can't do that for you tonight.
Maybe something for later in lockdown, possibly.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody's asked, do you want old records uploading to iRecord? I guess I know what the answer to that will be.
Yeah, it's coming up in my next section. Obviously, if you already have a method that you're using, whether you're submitting them to your local record centre, please continue with that method. We will be able to retrieve those records either way, as long as they are going somewhere. The ultimate goal is that everything will end up over on the National Biodiversity Network, on the atlases. But for us, as verifiers, we do like to have stuff coming through to iRecord, because that way we get to see when these really interesting records are coming in. But yeah, we're also very, very happy that you submit them to your local record centre too.
Eventually they'll gravitate to the scheme, even if they're coming to Covnod. So
yeah,
just make sure you do it, I suppose, is the answer, isn't it? Okay.
All the records from Covnod and all the other local record centres were incorporated in the new atlas as well. So
very good. Debbie's asked, how do you separate males and females apart from the legs?
Oh, that's a great question, Debbie. Thank you for raising that. And I'm really sorry I didn't put a slide in there. I'm just wondering if I can show you a slide from another presentation, but I'm on a work laptop rather than my personal one today. Nuts. So the males and females for the Nicrophorus are quite easy to separate because of the tarsi. The males have broader and hairier, longer fringes of hairs on their front tarsi. The males also tend to have broader heads, but the main feature is that the abdominal segments differ. So males actually have one more abdominal segment than females, and so their abdomen ends in a small point, whereas the females ends in a broader, rounder section. But what I can do is circulate a link to an existing illustration, or I can send a snapshot of my slide for you, if that helps. We don't necessarily need the beetles to be sexed when you're sending in records. It's not that important for us, but if you wanted to, say, maybe set up a little experiment of your own and have a couple breeding and you want to monitor that, then it's handy to know if you've got a male and a female if it's going to be successful.
Rob's asked the question, what's the difference between atrata and tristis?
Really good question. Yeah, so if I flick back through, these are two species that I haven't found until the last couple of years, with some with newer recorders coming in, that is commonly confused. So Phosphuga generally has this really shiny appearance. It has this semicircular pronotum and the narrow head, but tristis, which I haven't got a special slide for all on its own, sorry. Tristis doesn't have the narrow head. So this third one in, this one here, you can see my cursor. This is tristis. So it has a blunter edge to the front of the pronotum. It doesn't have the elongated head, and it has a quite dull appearance. The only part that is shining is the striae, so the longitudinal lines that go down the wing cases. So hopefully that helps you split those two. Is there any other questions, Richard?
I'm just trying to digest them and put them into my words here. If that's, I'll just read them. Do the larvae of Silphidae feed on the same things that the adults do?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So,
yeah, thanks, Martin. For the Necrodes, at least, and Thanatophilus, we know that they're feeding on carrion. But for things like this one, Silphid Larvae, you can actually see that it is feeding on a spider or something here. So they are predatory and they're going to be out and about searching for other invertebrates to feed on. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done, especially on things like obscura, Silphid obscura and Silphid tyrolensis. There's still not enough information about what they're feeding on and their life histories. So I'd be really interested to get more information on those.
Something that struck me by looking at some of these, they look a very bumblebee-like in the sort of abdomen with the yellow hairs. Is there any mimicry going on there, or?
Do you know, that's really interesting you say that. There's quite an old paper focusing on one of the North American species, which is Nicrophorus tomentosus, and we don't have any like that. I suppose our most closely related one is vestigator. So that's the one with the hairs all around the pronotum. So if you imagine the American species is one, sorry, so many slides, is one that the thorax is completely covered. So if you imagine this is completely covered in dense golden hairs, and then when the wing cases are upturned and the beetle is in flight, these become completely yellow because the underside is like a pale orangey yellow colour. So people described this as being a bumblebee mimic. For that particular species. It has been said for some of ours before. I never really see them that way, but I can see how people might think that. On the whole, it's considered just aposematic coloration, like ladybirds. You know, this is a warning: don't eat me, I taste bad. Rather than being a true bumblebee mimic. Otherwise, they would all be very hairy, I think.
And they do exude some noxious fluid, do they? I know when I was out at one of the sand dunes with Mike Howe, I was going to pick one up and he says, don't pick that up unless you've got gloves on, you'll regret it.
Yeah,
what are they doing there?
It's those secretions, I believe the same secretions that they're coating the carcass in. They do have a foul smell. Obviously, this can be released if they're attacked by a predator to say, don't eat me. But yeah, it isn't. It's not great. I have to say I've become a bit immune to it, but especially if you're not used to having them. Moth trappers often will say that these beetles ruin their pots. So if they do capture one to identify it and keep it in situ for a while, it can leave the pot pretty stinky. So apologies on their behalf, but you know, you are what you eat, and they don't smell great.
Yeah, okay, we'll let them off then. Is it worth burying some meat to attract beetles?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I'm just going to get into the section on trapping next, which is the most fun, actually. So I can give you some tips.
That sounds like an ideal segue. Let's go for it.
Great. So there are a few different ways to try and monitor and observe these beetles. You are not so likely just to encounter them when you're out for a walk, unless you're in woodland and you happen to see some dung on the footpath. You may get a red-breasted carrion beetle. But yeah, that you're not going to encounter them out and about because this resource is quite scarce and becoming scarcer. So the best thing to do is to try and lure them, and you can lure them in a couple of different ways, either by doing carrion traps or by running a light trap. And I would say that if you aren't so keen on the kind of rotting flesh side of things, the light trap will be the best option for you. It's kind of the nicest mess-free option. It's good though also to be opportunistic, because you know, kind of take on the lifestyle of a burying beetle, you know, observe these things as and when you can. So check any roadkill, any carrion that you are encountering, but please don't take my lead. Please wear gloves if you are going to be touching any carrion, and please be very safe when it comes to roads and roadkill. So try out those light traps. As I mentioned, we have got several species attracted to light. So we have got this small illustration up on the Beetle Silphidae recording scheme webpage that you can download and save a copy of. And hopefully this helps you remember these 7 species that are attracted to light. So if you're running a light trap, you will probably encounter some of these. I would actually say you probably encounter at least 3 of them wherever you are. I'd be particularly interested if you are ever over and kind of Norfolk, Suffolk area and you're running light traps, to look out for Nicrophorus vestigator, because that is our scarcest of the burying beetles. The carrion-based methods, then, there are a few different options. Basically, if you leave some meat out, rotting meat, yeah, you're going to attract something. You will also attract other things, blowflies, potentially other vertebrates that are potentially going to interfere with your trapping. So it's something to bear in mind, whichever method you employ. So you can bury carrion, you can bury meat, you can bury whole corpses if you find them of animals. And we have done this quite successfully, but be aware that some things may want to try and dig up your bait. So if you've got foxes in the area, badgers, they will all be very intrigued and interested in your carrion. So it is sometimes worth using chicken wire pegged down over the site, or constructing a kind of cage to protect that. Other things you can do are on a smaller scale. You could just use a small amount of bait and put it into a pitfall trap. If you're not familiar with a pitfall trap, this is quite simple as sinking a cup into the ground so that anything running nearby will fall straight into the cup. And especially when you're using bait, this will attract the burying beetles and to fall straight in. My tip for doing this, well, two tips. One that Matt is always advising is to mature your bait. So if you've got some, I don't know, chicken liver, a dead mouse, anything like that, if you leave it in a sealed container in a warm environment for several days, this will allow it to decompose a bit more, get those really nasty smells going, and therefore be more attractive to the beetles. So you've got greater chance of success. And second tip will be, please check your pitfall traps daily if you can, as frequently as you can. Basically, if you want to do this live form of trapping, if you end up having several beetles in there, you may get predation happening and then lose some of your beetles that way. And it's, yeah, best practice to just try and check it as regularly as you can. There are other options if you're going to be doing like killing traps, but really for these beetles, we don't need to retain specimens. So I would advise doing the live trapping route. And what you can do is kind of put a bit of soil, a bit of leaf litter in the bottom of the traps. They've got a bit of cover, a bit of protection from one another. The other thing I'd recommend doing with pitfall traps is to, again, put some chicken wire or something over the top, just so that no rodents and other small mammals fall into the trap and you end up with like double the bait. We don't want to be killing anything in this trap. You can kind of apply the same thing in a hanging form. So as I mentioned, many of these beetles are strong flyers, so they'll be able to access your bait if it's hanging as well. You can do that by just having like a simple yogurt pot hanging up in a tree, or you can have a slightly more sophisticated vein trap. And, oh, I missed this photo. So you can see here, this is a dead mouse in a mesh bag hanging over the pitfall trap. And then we have this fancy cage constructed, and this is Matt's design to try and avoid interference from other scavengers. Now, he did still get some interference from cows, I believe, on some of his sites, inquisitive cows. But this is a good tip to kind of suspend your bait over the pitfall trap rather than leaving it in the bottom. And this will help you if you need to handle the beetles afterwards, because you don't really want to be sorting through your trap when they're covered in kind of like slimy carrion mess. So by doing this, you kind of still got that lure. They're going to be coming in, they're attracted to it, but they're not able to kind of coat themselves in decomposing flesh. And then, as I mentioned, with some more sophisticated traps, you can purchase things like this, but you can also construct your own. So yeah, this is kind of like a funnel that the beetles can get into, but they can't get back out of. And this is the kind of trap that we were using at the university. So the bottom part we would fill with soil and then have a dead mouse in here, which would be lovely and appealing to the burying beetles. So I hope that covers it for trapping. Your records, as I mentioned, please go ahead and submit them to iRecord for us or to your local record centre. It really, really helps us if you include a photo. A record shot is really useful for us as verifiers to see those features. So don't worry, as I mentioned, they can be a bit feisty. You've got them in the moth trap, they might be causing havoc amongst your moths and can be tricky to get a photo of them. But really just get multiple photos from different angles and you're bound to capture what we need to see. But for reference, we really want those antennae and the thorax. So a nice dorsal shot of the beetle from above usually gets us what we need. Particularly of interest are the back legs and the hairs on the abdominal segments. But don't worry, we can still identify things even if your photo is blurry. So we can see from this one here, very hairy. It's got those hairs at the front of the pronotum and it's got those diagnostic curved hind legs as well. So we know that this one is Nicrophorus vespilloides. Another one here from Martin, who is in the audience, I think. They can be absolutely overwhelmed with mites sometimes. And you might think that this is going to obscure some of those ID features. Sometimes it does. Sometimes that's a bit annoying. But with this one, we could still tell that this was Nicrophorus vespilloides because it's a little cheeky hind leg just poking out at the back there. And it's nice and curved. You can also just make out there's some golden hairs on the abdominal segments. I just wanted to touch on how important historical records are for us as well. So when we set up the scheme, we didn't have this backlog of, data. So Matt and I have been doing this through extracting historic records from publications, but also I've been going to other museums and extracting data from those records too. And it's been absolutely invaluable because we can then compare those historic distributions with those that are found today. And it enables us to go and find particular sites that are interesting too. So this is Silphid carinata. We've given it the common name of the Great Ridgewood Carrion Beetle. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Why do we do that? This is because it's really only known from this site. It hasn't been recorded since 1985, so potentially extinct now, but we use the collections from several different museums, but primarily Oxford, to look at exactly where it was last recorded from and then go and revisit this site. We didn't unfortunately have any luck when we last went, but we are hoping to revisit this. So without those historic collections, we wouldn't have that information. Really, really important. Excuse me. And then also, this the importance of collecting more data has been highlighted by the fact that my colleague Steve Lane, who I co-authored the recent book with, he produced a review on the status of sylphids in Great Britain just before the book came out. So this has enabled us to feature a lot more about the conservation statuses within the book, which has been amazing. But this hadn't been done before using the IUCN statuses. So really, really valuable. And we have had a couple of, I'd like to say, success stories, not quite, but more positive elements. So obviously some of these beetles aren't doing too well, but one species in particular that was previously considered critically endangered under the British rarity system is now seen as being just vulnerable as an IUCN status. So it's nationally rare rather than critically endangered. So that's nice and positive. It's still only known from five or so sites in the whole of the UK, but it is where it is found, it is doing a bit better than it previously was. So I'll take this as a positive. And with that, I would like to say, I look forward to seeing your records. Let's have a little practice together. What I've done is I've just put up a couple of pictures. There's no pressure. If we'd been a bit more organised, we could have maybe set up a poll, but I'm not sure how to do that in Zoom yet. So what I've done is I've just given you 3 options here. You can drop it into the chat, or you can just have a little think to yourself what you think it might be. Don't be shy. This one here, you want to look at the colour of the antenna, look for any presence of hairs on the thorax, look at those orange markings and have a think. Is it A, Nicrophorus humator, B, Nicrophorus vespilloides, or C, Nicrophorus vespilloides? Don't worry if you've not been able to remember those names. So Nicrophorus humator, all black. Nicrophorus vespilloides, something about the antenna. And Nicrophorus vespilloides, something about those hind legs. So hopefully this one was easy for you. Okay, hopefully that's enough time. And this one was Nicrophorus vespilloides. So well done to those of you that got that right. It has black antennal clubs. So this is the easiest one to separate from all the others with those orange markings. Black antenna, vespilloides. And it's got some lovely hitchhikers there too. You can make out that it's got the distinct splodges for the second banding, but we can't see its legs, and that doesn't bother me because we can see its antenna. This one here, so the text doesn't come up too well, does it? Is it Nicrophorus investigator? Is it vespilloides again? Or is it Nicrophorus vestigator? The taxonomists like to annoy us with the use of names here, investigator or vestigator. So you'll probably eliminate vespilloides because we've just seen it. We know it's got black antennal clubs, so it's not that one. Investigator and vestigator, what separates those is the presence of hairs on the thorax. So we can look at this one and say, pretty sure, no hairs on here. And what have we got down the back end? Got a couple of Scotty dogs. I know I said don't use that feature, but you can. Yeah, we can definitely tell it's not vestigator, no hairs. Okay. Moving on to the next one, and my options haven't come up. So is this one a investigator again? Is it vestigator or vespillo? So we can see orange clubs on the antennae. This one actually, if you see it from a different angle, it almost looks like it has lovely golden eyelashes. It does have a lovely row of golden hairs here. And most importantly, look at those back legs. It has got curved hind legs. So this one is vespillo, the bent-legged carrion beetle. Another one here for you. I can give you a little bit longer on this one. And if anyone wants to drop it in the chat, you're welcome to. And Richard could read that out for me. So for this one, we're looking at the structures on the elytra, whether it's dull or shiny, and looking at that head shape as well. Excellent, atrata. Yes, well done, Richard. So it has that narrow elongate head. It has the semicircular pronotum, and it is nice and shiny. So this is the common snail hunter. So if it was Tristis, it would be all matte. You would have a blunter front to the pronotum here, and you wouldn't have a narrow elongate head. And finally, I've got one more for you. Someone. A bit trickier this one. We didn't go into great detail about it, but anyone want to hazard a guess? I'll give you two options. Is it Necrodes littoralis or is it Thanatophilus sinuatus? So Necrodes, I was going to say all black. Yeah, it's all black actually. All black. Has a circular pronotum, and Thanatophilus, much smaller. We can't tell size on this one, but it has this feature of having tiny little pointy bits here, which if we were able to zoom in, we could show you, but I can't. Sorry. This one I should have had a scale up. That would have helped you. Is Thanatophilus sinuatus. And that one is separated from rugosus because it has the smooth elytra in between the striations, unlike rugosus, which has that lovely lumpy bumpy texture. So that was just a little bit of fun. Don't worry if you didn't get any right. Once you have a copy of the key and you have some time to read it through, and also you have something in front of you to look at, whether that's your own photos or a beetle out in the field, everything will hopefully click into place. But you can also get in touch with us at the recording scheme, with me and Matt, and we're more than happy to help with any identification queries that you've got. So what's next for us? Well, you know, just to carry on boosting the recording effort. The more people that we have aware of these beetles and out monitoring them with us, you know, the better idea we'll have of this picture of their current conservation requirements. Hopefully we can deliver some more in-person workshops. Who knows when that will be, but it is a much more fun and engaging way of learning about carrion beetles. Setting the traps is always a good highlight, and checking the traps is even better. And as I mentioned, I'm pretty keen to create a resource for identification of the larvae too. So if you're able to help in any way with any of your own observations, or if you find any specimens, do get in touch and let me know. With that, I just want to say a huge thanks to Matt and Richard, who I work with at the recording scheme. Big thanks to you, Martin. There wouldn't be a recording scheme without Martin Harvey, and the support of Helen Roy as well. Been brilliant. Big thanks to everybody that let me use their lovely, lovely photos today. And of course, a very big thanks to my co-authors, Steve and Colin, who I worked with on the atlas. And thank you all for the potential that you're going to be providing us. I hope you have a lot of fun looking for carrion beetles, and welcome to the Carrion Club.